welcome you today. I am so glad that you can be here with us for this bonus session. So this is our bonus day for the Diabetic Success Holiday Challenge. So I'm just really glad that you can be here with us today. We're going to talk about the power of habit and how to actually tap into it for our advantage. Sometimes habits can feel like weights that hold us back from going forward towards our goals. But I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about how we can actually use the power of habit to help us reach our goals. So let's start with looking at the power of habits in our lives. Habits actually constitute a large part of who we are and what we actually accomplish on a day-to-day basis, as well as over our lifetime. Habits are something that our brain uses to be more efficient. Just imagine what kind of energy it would take if your brain had to think through all the steps of brushing your teeth or getting dressed or even driving a car. These things all become habits, and habits are a way that your brain uses to make repeated common actions automatic. By putting them on automatic, it enables us to use our brain energy more actively for other things while we are engaged in habitual activities. The building of habits depends largely on our habits and routines. And because of this, we are actually becoming either a better version of ourselves or a worse version of ourselves every day, depending on where our habits are taking us. When we look at lifestyle and health, habits are extremely powerful in having gotten us to wherever we are today. But we can also use the power of habit formation to help us make positive changes and become better versions of ourselves every day. David Eagleman said, brains are in the business of gathering information and steering behavior appropriately. It doesn't matter whether consciousness is involved in the decision making, and most of the time, it's not. Because once something becomes a habit, our brain doesn't actually have to think about it consciously. It's just something that can happen automatically. But let's look a little bit about how that mechanism works. You see, habits are what really drive our brains. Many of our day-to-day actions are automatic. So when we decide we want to change a habit, we really need clarity around an exit strategy from that habit loop, because these loops are what our brain depends on for much of our activity on a day-to-day basis. We have a really powerful three-step loop that informs our habitual activities. And the three steps are cues, routines, and rewards. So let's take a look at each one of them a little bit more deeply. So cues are actually like triggers that trigger an automatic mode in our brain and helps our brain to pick, okay, which habit is going to happen now? Like which loop are we going to go through? And for example, people that smoke, some cues for that smoking habit can be very simple, everyday kinds of activities. For some people, it's that finishing the dessert, picking up the cup of coffee, and that's where the cigarette gets picked up. For other people, a cue for smoking might be a particular chair that when they sit in this chair, they smoke. Those are examples of cues. We also have cues related to food. Sometimes it is, okay, I'm getting ready to go to bed, I open the fridge. And so that cue is like, okay, I'm going to get something to eat before I go to bed, like a bowl of ice cream. All of those are examples of how cues are the triggers for your brain to move into automatic mode with a particular habit. The second part of this loop formation has to do with which routine is kicked off. Sometimes it's a physical routine. Like when this happens, I eat. Okay, so that'd be an example of a physical routine. Sometimes it's a mental routine. When somebody says to me, oh, let me do that for you, it can cue up mental habits like, oh, they don't think I'm good enough, or I will never be able to be seen as successful at this task, or a lot of these mental habits tend to be really negative. And so cues can trigger mental habits that are negative self-talk. They can also trigger positive mental health habits, but we find that for many people, the triggers actually trigger things that are automatically negative. And then we have emotional triggers. Sometimes there's like a particular behavior in someone or a particular mood that then triggers an emotion. Maybe it's when you hear a particular phrase that was associated with long ago trauma or abuse or a particular body language or mannerism. Those can also act as cues or triggers for an emotional response. It might be anger, it might be fear, it might be anxiety. Um, PTSD is a really good example of that. Just a couple days ago, I was listening to the story of a woman who's part of the Hmong ethnic culture in Laos. And her parents were forced to flee Laos at the end of the Vietnam War because her father had been part of the Hmong forces recruited by the CIA to help the United States Army battle communism in northern Laos. And because of their involvement with that, when the US pulled out of Vietnam, they were kind of left to fend for themselves. And they ended up being refugees that had to flee on foot out of the country of Laos across the Mekong River into Thailand. They lost her grandfather on that attempted crossing. He was killed. They never saw him again. There was a lot of trauma related to that whole war experience. And she talked about how much ordnance had been dropped in Laos during the Vietnam War. And it was something like the equivalent of a bomber load of bombs every 8 minutes for 24 years. That was like the equivalency, which meant that her parents were exposed to that sound of bombs dropping for years. And it created such a strong emotional trigger that to this day, they do not like fireworks, because fireworks trigger for them these emotional responses associated with the trauma of war. So that's how cues trigger different routines: physical, mental, or emotional. And when that routine is executed, our brain experiences some kind of reward. And it's when there is some reward or perceived reward with that behavior loop that your brain decides, oh, this looks like something I should do again. Even when sometimes that reward is something that happens after a negative loop, in some way, your brain perceives that as a coping mechanism that's better than not doing that. So reward doesn't always mean like you feel great, but it can mean that you feel great. With many addictions, the reward is a temporary surge in dopamine levels. So that's a neurotransmitter in your brain that helps you to feel good. So in some way, there is a reward that your brain associates with that routine that was triggered by a particular cue. So when we want to change habits, what we're looking at is actually changing the routine, changing the behavior habit loop, and still getting the same reward. When we're successful at doing that, that's when new habits will stick. And so it's always important to kind of think about these 3 steps. When we have a cue, if we want to respond to that cue in a different way, then we want to make sure that we set it up so our brain perceives a reward at the end. So that's part of what goes on in our heads when we change habits and we implement new habit patterns. When we're looking at change, and like we talked about yesterday, anytime we decide to grow, it involves some level of change. And often we have lots of enthusiasm, because enthusiasm for positive change is very common. Lots of us experience that on a very frequent basis. Often the second, which is commitment, is a lot more rare. Commitment is that ability to see through to the achievement of a goal. Not just feeling great about having a goal, but actually executing on a plan to reach that goal. So we want to talk about some things that can help us with success. In the Journal of Clinical Psychology, they published a study which I thought found very interesting. And they said that 54% of people who determine to make a life change don't sustain it more than 6 months. And that the average person makes the same life resolution 10 times without success. So we see that many times there are many good intentions. People say, yes, I want to do something that is going to be a positive change, a way that I can grow. But follow through is often very weak. So the problem here is not usually that we don't know what we should do, but committing to it tends to be a big obstacle for many people. And many of us lack structures in our life that help us support positive behavioral changes. So let's talk about that. You see, tools that can help us to implement change and to be successful with maintaining that change long term involve things like learning how to ride the motivation wave. A motivation wave is a term we use for those moments when we feel inspired to do something. I hope that here at the end of our 7-day challenge, you are currently on a motivation wave. You're actually saying, yes, here's something I want to do. I want to implement this so that I can go through the holidays successfully. So this is a moment when we need to take advantage of that motivational waves. Motivational waves don't last forever, but they can be very helpful in getting us started on a new habit or a positive change in our life. BJ Fogg, who's the director of Persuasive Technology Lab at Stanford University, said, motivation only has one purpose in our lives. It's to help us do the hard things. Things that are easy require very little motivation. But change is not one of those easy things. And so one of the wonderful ways that we can use the mechanism of motivation is to help us do the hard things. And one of the ways that it does that is by helping us to get started on something new. As Jim Rohn said, motivation is what gets you started, but habit is what keeps you going. And so we can ride this motivation wave to get started with new behaviors, with changes in our lives that help us to grow, help us to improve our health, help us to be better people. But it means that we need to use this power of motivation to start a new habit. You know, in the Bible, it says there's a principle that says we can overcome evil with good. And actually, this reflects the way that our brain works. The way that we form new habits is by making new pathways and not using the old pathways. As we use new neural pathways in our brain, we make like new ruts, new habits, new ways that our brain finds easy to follow. But the only way we can do that is through repetition of the behavior. So we can use motivation to help us get those beginning reps in that help us to build a pathway for new habits. And the more we use the new pathway and the less we use the old pathway, the stronger this new pathway becomes until we can actually overcome the bad habit by making the new habit pathway stronger. So we don't really have a way to just directly erase old pathways. What we do in our brains is we build new pathways that become stronger with use, and the old pathways get weaker as they are not used. So that is actually the neurological process behind building new habits. So something that they have found that helps many people, especially with habits that maybe are going against old habits that are really well ingrained, is to remember that even if we just get better 1% at a time, that 1% compounds over time. So as we start this new habit pathway, it will get stronger. And as it gets stronger, it becomes easier to do. And I said sometimes here because an exception to this is if we're actually dealing with an addiction. The most success in kicking addictive habit pathways is to cold turkey that change. In other words, we don't wean off of an addiction. That is not the most effective way for long term success. We find that cold turkey stopping an addictive habit, often that requires quite a bit of support and accountability and the use of other tools to maintain that. But we don't want to just do that 1% at a time. So that's when I say this particular approach doesn't work as well. But there are many habits where we're not necessarily overcoming some addiction. We're just wanting to change and improve the habit loops that we have going in our lives. So the one of the most important factors in starting a new habit is to start it by practicing it consistently. And that is actually more important than how long we're at it. A good example of that would be deciding that we're wanting to increase our exercise or get started exercising. It can be very important to get a start that maybe doesn't mean we're exercising for an hour the first day, but even getting started on like 5 minutes of exercise that we can consistently do every day without fail. That helps to build the habit and makes the even 5 minute automatic. So we want to set ourselves up for success by implementing a change that is small enough for us to do it successfully and consistently. Once it is consistent, it's easier to increase the time or the intensity of that habit. For example, doing 5 minutes of exercise 7 days a week helps us to, for example, get that slot in our day when we're doing the 5 minutes of exercise. And then it's not nearly as hard to increase it to 10 minutes in that same slot every day because we already have the habit of doing it every day. Now you're just increasing the time. So doing that is one of the ways in which we can implement better habits on a very consistent basis, but doing it every day. So that is part of one of the things we should take into consideration when we make our SMART goals. When we talk about being realistic with our SMART goals, let's think about what can we actually know we can be successful at doing consistently. And then let's set that as our first level goal. As soon as that is consistent, and we've been able to do that for several weeks consistently, we can add to that using the habit pattern that has gotten started through consistency. We can always increase time and the degree of change as we go along. So I want to really encourage you that as you start out and you say, what am I going to do differently? Try to really pick something that the quantity is something you can be very consistent about. That way you set yourself up for tiny, easy, but very doable steps. And looking at where we are in terms of the holidays, that might mean there's some things you want to start doing right now so that by the time we hit Thanksgiving, by the time we hit Christmas or other December celebrations, that you already have some habitual ways of dealing with obstacles that you have seen coming up. This can be things that are as simple as verbalizing that this is a choice you're making and giving permission to the people around you to make different choices. Like letting them know, I've decided that this holiday season, I want to do this differently. And so for me, this is what's going to work. And please don't let it bother you if you're doing something a little different. You're eating something a little different. You're eating at different times. You're approaching this whole holiday season differently than I am. That's okay, because this is just a choice I've made because I know I need to do this for my own health, for my own ability to grow personally. And giving people permission to be doing different things than you, and doing that early on so they're kind of used to that by the time you actually hit Thanksgiving dinner. that can be one of those tiny, easy, doable steps. But it requires intentionality, like looking for opportunities to drop that into a conversation. Like, that's okay. I think I might be doing something a little bit different this holiday, and explain what it is you're doing differently so they understand. But I want you to know that I'm completely good with you, proceeding with whatever it is you've decided to do, however you want to do it. A second tool for helping us be successful in maintaining habit change and building new habits is accountability. And accountability plays an extremely important role in this. We have a 65% chance of reaching a goal if we commit to someone else. That means we tell someone else about our goal. That gives us a 65% chance of reaching it. If you have a specific appointment for accountability, then success levels go up as high as 95%. So that is one of the reasons why making sure you find someone else to be accountable for, and how even having like a weekly or some anyway regular commitment to meeting with a group or meeting with a coach can really, really make a difference in your success rate for reaching your goals. And that was from a study that the American Society of Training and American Society of Training and Development did. And I thought that was really interesting because a lot of people don't realize how important the accountability factor is to implementing a new habit. Let me give you an example. Say you've decided that you are going to exercise 5 mornings a week, and you have an exercise buddy. Well, let me back up. You decide you're going to do the exercise 5 times a week. You wake up in the morning and your alarm goes off at the time you need to get up to be able to get that exercise done before you go to work or start your daily routine. Now, you tell me, if you have an exercise buddy that's waiting for you down the street to walk with you at 6 o'clock, and your alarm's gone off at 5:30 so that you can get up and get ready, are you more likely to get up if you know your buddy's waiting for you down the road, or if you haven't told anybody that you're going to be getting up and exercising at 6 o'clock every morning? It's just on you, and and so you set your alarm, but nobody will know if you don't actually get up and you don't actually get up and exercise. In which of those scenarios do you think you're more likely to go exercise? When you know somebody's waiting on you and they're going to call you up or text you or say, "Hey, where were you? I was out there waiting for you and you didn't show up." Or when nobody else really knows that you were even planning to do it. It's obvious that having the accountability of somebody you are meeting with, somebody that's expecting you to come up and meet that goal and is going to be help to make you accountable for it, that can be really, really important in your long-term ability to build that new habit to reach that goal. Thomas Monson famously said, when performance is measured, performance improves. So whatever we pay attention to and focus on, that the performance of that activity will improve. So, for example, if you write down your goal and you stick it on the refrigerator, and you have a little box for every day on your calendar and you check it off in that box when you do that habit, your performance will improve because you are now measuring it. You are paying attention to it. But when performance is measured and reported, the rate of improvement accelerates. So it's like a real synergistic tool is reporting what it is you're measuring. And so that's something that can easily be done, for example, in a group, a support group with a coach that helps you report on the performance that you are measuring. So those are some ways that can really help you to be even more successful. And so reaching goals is not for the faint of heart. It takes time. It takes hard work. It takes perseverance and a commitment to achieve. But a key factor in reaching that goal is leveraging an accountability system. All you need to make yourself accountable is a clear goal and a willingness to let others help you achieve your goal. That's something I would love to help you do. And when we get on a call, we'll talk about what are things that we can do to help you get a system in place for success over the holidays. So, to improve your chances of success, I really, really encourage you to use the power of accountability. And on our phone call, we can talk about different ways in which you can really implement that power so that you can reach your goals successfully. So don't forget to set up a call with me. Here is the link. I also texted it to you and sent it to you. So remember that just having this call with me and going over your goals and committing to them verbally with me on the phone, right there, it's going to improve your chance of success. So I want to give you that opportunity. And so I'll look forward to talking with you. I want you to take charge today and know that you can do it. You know, we have the ability to make choices. These choices are very powerful, but we can also pull and access an even stronger tool than our own willpower and our own choices. And that is understanding that there is a power above and outside of us that can help us to stick with the choices that we are choosing to make. And so let's get together, let's talk about this, and let's make sure that you have success as you head through the holidays. So I want to thank you so much for joining me on this journey through the last week on this challenge of getting through our holidays successfully. And know that I'm here, I'm rooting for you, and you can always, contact me, get a hold of me if you need some help, you need somebody to talk to. We're going to be working about how we can do that effectively, you and me together. So now I just want to say thank you. Thank you for being here. Now I'm ready to go into our question and answer period. And one of the questions that came up yesterday that we wanted to remember to hit again today was that Wendy had brought up, I believe it was Thursday of last week, the question about D3 combined with K2 and how important is this, and is this a good thing to do? So I did go and do some research on this. We know that in the body, vitamin D works hand in hand with vitamin K for bone strength and for control of calcium deposition. There are some early studies looking at the way these two things work together that show that there might be some positive effects. There was one interesting study which was actually done with diabetics. And one of the things they found was that when um, vitamin K and vitamin D are combined, that diabetics experience better blood sugar control than just D or K by themselves. So I think that that's important for us to take into account. I have not found anything that is negative about taking those two things together. We don't really have a lot of research on all the benefits. They're doing research right now on the benefits on cardiovascular disease to see, because vitamin K helps to determine where calcium gets deposited in the body, like whether it's deposited in the bones or gets deposited in the arteries as the calcification atherosclerotic disease process. It's thought that perhaps vitamin K can help that calcium go to your bones more than to your arteries, and therefore have an impact on the development of cardiovascular disease. But we don't have any studies that I'm able to find at this point that show that is a positive impact. We don't know, but nothing seems to indicate a negative impact. So as diabetics, I think that it makes sense, since most of us need to supplement at least part of the year, if not all of the year, that getting a combination of D and K together can't hurt and might actually provide some benefit. It can be more expensive as a formulation, so that's something you have to take into consideration. If it was too expensive to get the formulation that is a combination, but you could afford to get just plain D, hey, by all means, get D. But if that's not an issue, then I think there's certainly something to be said for using them together. One of the sources, a really good source that also combines with zinc and some other things that are great for your immune system, can be found at Modern Manna. And I believe that's modernmanna.org. I don't think it's a com. I think it's an org. But Modern Manna, it's a lifestyle change center here in California. I know the people that run it. It has a really excellent reputation, and they sell this particular supplement. So that one is one that I would recommend. I haven't looked at a lot of other sources to see what the other ones out there are. So I hope that's helpful. Do you have any other questions, Wendy, or anything else that we could talk about that would be helpful?
Okay. Thanks. Excuse me. Thanks for the information on the vitamin. Like I said, a dietitian um, g- had it for my friend, and I was just curious. And it sounds it sounds like it's potentially really a good thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the presentation with the habits. There's always so much work to do in that area, but I like the outline.
Good, good. I hope that was helpful. Okay, have a great day.